Thank you, Chair. You got it 100% right, and with your Celtic roots, why wouldn't you? My wife's name is Ciara. Good morning, everybody. It's an honour to speak at your conference. I was indeed a board member of the foundation. I see my pal from that era, John Williams, and we had good times during that period. So the title of my address is Living with a Cancer Condition for 30 Years, Lessons Learned. My health backstory is that 30 years ago, next January, when living in Belgium, I was diagnosed with a neuroendocrine tumours condition. I was 37 at the time. I had a mid-gut primary, secondaries in my lymph nodes, mesentery area, and lots of liver metastases. It came out of the blue. I've been ducking and diving since. After I leave here, I'll go to my GP in Wine Street, Frank Hayes. The practice nurse, his wife Helen, will give me an injection of a sandostatin, octreotide, I receive every 28 days. And as happens with a car that has the needle in the red zone, once the fuel is poured into my tank, I'll be good to go again for another 28 days. The important truth is that I'm above ground, and this day, Friday, November the 10th, is a begin again new day. One of the most important lessons I've learned in my adventures with a chronic condition is that sometimes you have to take the primary responsibility for managing your own health challenge. Another is that to survive, on occasions, you have to move beyond the conventional tracks and pathways. In my case, the catalyst that prompted action on my part was the discreet advice of a Belgian radiologist who advised me to get a second opinion, and a research scientist pal from this town, Frank Gannon, who told me a more proactive, aggressive approach rather than just monitor was required to combat my disease. The thinking outside the box factor kicked in when I persuaded a surgeon who was based in this hospital, Peter Morrison, and the then health authority in this region, the Northwestern Health Board in the personage of Pat Harvey, to approve my request to access treatment in Sweden. And with their support, I was the first Irish person to use the E112 system to receive care in a centre of excellence for NETs in Sweden. I've had several interventions there since, including surgery, radioembolization, and radiofrequency ablation of the liver, and treatment known as PRRT, involving 4 bouts of a radioactive isotope. Almost 15 years ago, with the endocrinologist, Professor Donald O'Shea, and some of his colleagues, I began campaigning for the creation of an Irish Centre of Excellence. That was put into place at St. Vincent's Hospital. Gastroenterologist, Professor Dermot O'Toole, was appointed the national lead. And as an indication of my faith in the project, I repatriated my care from Sweden. And I've been using St. Vincent's as my point of reference and centre of excellence for more than a decade. I was delighted before we began our formal business here this morning to meet for the first time one of my fellow patients who was attending that centre. So then, 11 years ago, we formed a support group for patients and their families. We have excellent relations with the health professionals who deliver our care, with the HSE personnel who sanction treatment abroad when required, and indeed with the pharma companies who make the products that keep us alive. Next weekend, Friday night and then Saturday, we'll have our annual patient gathering. This year we're holding it in Cork. You have to keep the real capital of Ireland on side. The most popular part of the gathering is where patients and their families have the chance to put questions to the clinicians and others who are delivering the service. This month, for the very first time, a patient received PWRT treatment in St. Vincent's. Up to now, everyone had been required to travel to Sweden, Holland, or the UK for it. It is a major advance. Back in 2008, I was the first Irish patient to receive PWRT in Sweden. At the time, it hadn't been approved by the FDA, and often in Sweden, I'd meet patients from Canada, from Argentina, from Israel, and I was delighted that we, that Irish cohort, had access to that treatment. Our next goal is to get better access to MRI scanning using a product called gallium. It provides better pictures and better information. There's one gallium machine in St. Vincent's, but access to it is a nightmare. Some of the factors like hiring and retaining radiographers are beyond the hospital's control. It's difficult to get accommodation at the right price in South Dublin. The private hospitals are sometimes offering better wages and better conditions. And spending a few years in Australia is a tempting option. There's a second gallium facility in St. James's, but it's used mainly for prostate cases, a more common cancer than NETs. In other countries, it is significantly easier for NETs patients to access gallium facilities. That's why getting a solution to the problem is a current priority for our group, and we'll win. We have the Director of the National Cancer Control Programme, Richard Elijah, and the Taoiseach Micheál Martin, as well as health professionals who mind us at our event next weekend. So that's the summary of my NET story. But my purpose in coming here today is to have a conversation about us and this place, Sligo. I deliberately didn't give Susanna an advance copy of my script. She was chasing me for it, but I was formulating my thoughts as this day approached, and I preferred to just let it bubble and come to the surface and to get to this point. So I'm here to ask, what are we doing? And where are we going? So I'm a journalist. I worked for RTE, the National Broadcasting Service, for 41 years before retiring 2 years ago. And Fergal, there really is no such thing as retirement. You don't fall off the cliff, you keep going. I spent 20 years working in Belfast. Before that, I was based in Brussels for 12 years. My first RTE posting was the 9 years served in this region as Northwest correspondent. So my brief throughout my life was to observe what was going on and to try to understand and then explain its relevance. So I'll share with you some of the details that I think have a significance for this discussion and the theme of your conference, health science, expanding the boundaries. 2 years ago, for the first time since the aftermath of the famine, our population south of the border exceeded 5 million. In 1841, before the famine struck, the island of Ireland had a population of 8.2 million. Last year, the combined population grew to 7.1 million, 1.9 million in Northern Ireland and 5.2 in the south. We're 1 million shy of our figures from almost 200 years ago, but we are on a growth spurt. To put our situation in context, during those 2 centuries, the population of Britain more than trebled. The world's population increased more than 6-fold. But after decade upon decade of depopulation and decline, our population is on the increase, and that pattern is predicted to continue. Something else we have to take into consideration on this island. That's Brexit, the UK's decision in its referendum of 2016 to leave the European Union. It has disrupted the fragile political stability that existed in Northern Ireland after the 1998, since the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. There hasn't been a government in Northern Ireland for over a year now. At the same time, the popularity of Sinn Féin is increasing on both sides of the border. It is a party that passionately believes in a united Ireland. And it's highly likely in our lifetime there will be a border poll. And if that doesn't produce a result supporting change in the constitutional position, it's likely a second border poll will be held 7 years later. So we're in a state of flux, and we are struggling with preparation for change, particularly the new circumstances created by population growth. Our difficulties are entirely understandable because our experience was in attempting to cope with the consequences of population decline. We were used to closing railway stations, closing schools, closing Garda stations and post offices. We were used to the scenes of people going to airports, saying goodbye to their relatives who were emigrating. Now, we have to learn new skills. Let's look at the sector that concerns you, health. People are living longer. Treatments are improving. These two factors are putting huge pressure on exchequer funding. That's a problem throughout the Western world. So Chris Whitty today was talking about the long-term problems of an ageing population in the UK. Northern Ireland, the neighbouring jurisdiction, has an NHS model with free GP and hospital care, free prescriptions. In England, almost 8 million people are currently on waiting lists to start routine hospital treatments. That's a record high. Northern Ireland has the longest waiting times in the UK, actually longer than ours. Less than 5% of the people in Northern Ireland have private health insurance. Here, the story is almost half our population has opted to take out private healthcare in order to skip the queues in the public health system. We have a hybrid public-private model. We have the plan called Sloanse Care to beef up our public healthcare system. It has the support of all the main political parties, but reaching the staging posts on that very long journey is well behind schedule. That is and will continue to be the pattern as we attempt to reorganise and improve against a backdrop of increasing population and longer life expectancy. Earlier, I made reference to 2 lessons learned about sometimes one has to take responsibility for managing one's challenge and the importance of sometimes venturing beyond traditional pathways. With those 2 principles in mind, I'd like to draw your attention to 2 situations relevant to our conversation. The first involves an EU measure that entitles a citizen on a public waiting list to access care in another EU jurisdiction. It's a souped-up version of the E112 measure I used to travel for treatment in Sweden. It's called the Cross-Border Directive. And in this instance, all the patient needs is a referral letter from a GP. The maximum budget available for a service he or she wants to access in a private or public hospital in another EU country is the going rate for the procedure in his or her home state. If it costs more, the maximum you get is the going rate in your own country. If it costs less, that's your budget. In Ireland, the most enthusiastic promoters of the cross-border directive are the Healy-Rae brothers, two TDs in County Kerry, and an independent TD from neighbouring County Cork, Michael Collins. They have connected not hundreds, but thousands of patients from the southwest with a privately owned Kingsbridge Clinic in Belfast. The most common procedures involve cataracts, hips, and knees. People have travelled there in the busloads, week after week, month after month. Most of the soldiers in our army are members of the representative organisation PD Fora. Unlike officers who are enrolled in private healthcare systems, they are dependent on the public health system. But PD Fora is now a significant client of Kingsbridge using the cross-border directive. Our soldiers travelling across the border. The policy is an EU initiative. So after the UK left the EU, it was thought the southern traffic to Kingsbridge would fall away. But that's not the case. Our government introduced a special budget line to keep it funded, and the traffic continues. As well as that, Irish citizens continue to be entitled to avail of services in mainland European countries, and that traffic is growing. That's the basis for those ads you see on television advertising treatment in Spain. I'd now like to draw your attention to a second example of taking responsibility for your own challenge and venturing away from traditional paths. This is about the story of what's happening in our neighbouring county, Donegal. Since the foundation of the state, it has often felt neglected by the centre of government in Dublin, and its sense of isolation is compounded by its land border with Northern Ireland. In the redrafted set of regions created after the establishment of the Health Service Executive, Donegal was assigned to West and Northwest. For residents in parts of that large county, this meant the relevant hospital for some procedures was Galway, a difficult 5-hour journey away. Eventually, pragmatism and the obvious kicked in. For some services, citizens from Donegal are now travelling, from parts of Donegal, are now travelling to Altnagelvin Hospital in Derry. On many levels, the cooperation between those counties in different jurisdictions is increasing, with support, including funding from the government. The local authorities in Donegal and Derry Strabane have an excellent relationship. The third level colleges, the ATU in Letterkenny and McGee in Derry, are finding synergies. And that trend of accessing healthcare in Altnagelvin is continuing. Influenced by what I see happening elsewhere, more and more I ask myself, what are we doing here? This is where I was born and reared. This is where I will spend what's left in my life. So what's the future of health service delivery here? Could we, should we be thinking about doing things differently? 2 weeks ago, I came to visit a man who was seriously ill in this hospital. It was a chastening experience. Staff were working hard in pressurized circumstances, but it was grim. They deserve better, and we deserve better. The realist in me believes in terms of the provision of the appropriate buildings and services, we're always going to be playing catch up. The hospital that could meet our needs is unlikely to be delivered in my lifetime. the upgraded N17 road that would allow access to Galway University Hospital, the designated provider of many services for us that are not available here, will not be built in my lifetime. The traffic issues that bung up Galway City and the area around its hospital are likely to continue because the necessary ring road and other changes will not come anytime soon. The parking problems around Galway Hospital will continue. The pressures in many places, including its ER department, will remain a challenge. I admire Professor Michael Kerrin and his campaign to deliver a new cancer centre in Galway. I've moderated a number of meetings for him, but I'm convinced it'll be several years, probably more than a decade, before that centre is delivered. For all of those reasons, listening to the accents here today, Scottish, Norwegian, from north of the border, from different parts of Ireland, in this place where people work without frontiers, people from different backgrounds, I believe this is the place and the time to mention the Southwest Hospital in Enniskillen, no more than an hour's drive from here. Opened in 2012. It was built at a cost of £700 million, and it was the first hospital in Northern Ireland with ensuite rooms for every patient. It has never functioned to its full capacity, and it has major difficulties recruiting and retaining staff. There is the difficulty of getting flying hours. If you are not doing a certain amount of work, how does that help with your qualifications, your expertise? What does that do for your self-confidence? As a result of the situation, it is no longer an acute type 1 hospital. Trauma and emergency services have been withdrawn, resulting in tens of thousands of people travelling to Derry for treatment. A local pressure group says 2 of its 5 operating theatres remain uncommissioned, and the others are not functioning at anywhere near capacity. This is an underused, precious resource on our doorstep. For some reason, maybe it's something in the water, maybe it's the beauty of the landscape. Whatever it is, we tend to be mild people in this area. We're not pushy. We're understated. It's many years since we had a senior figure in government representing us and making a case for us. Yet, we cross the border to go shopping in Enniskillen. We eat in the Killyhevlin Hotel. Fermanagh people play golf in Ross's Point and Strandhill. They make use of our beaches and our caravan parks. Yet, have we ever contemplated having a conversation about how we might use our healthcare resources to the benefit of both communities? It is as if the poorest border is a Berlin Wall. Why is that? Are there people who would be open to exploring the possibilities in cross-border healthcare cooperation, to do what is happening in Donegal and Derry, to explore accessing major sources of funding like the government's Shared Island Fund? Are there initiatives that could be attempted to help communities in South Donegal and Leitrim and West Cavan, as well as in Sligo and Fermanagh? How might it work? Could clinicians from Sligo make use of the Enniskillen hospital facilities in the same way that consultants from the south travel to the Kingsbridge Clinic in Belfast and Northern Ireland consultants travel to the Kingsbridge site in Sligo, that place we once called Garden Hill? Is there a willingness to venture beyond the clogged pathways and to try a different route? Or is this sufficient? Is there one more rodeo left in us? Are there people who are willing to think outside the box? During the year, I was very moved by the programme about Noel Brown and what he did for Irish healthcare and the way decades later he is regarded. I genuinely think that there are possibilities for us in this area to do more for our region. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. And I believe we all share a common desire to do the best we can in the time we have.